Welcome to the launch of the study Trans Labour Market Wallet. My name is Kristina Alsen, I'm from Medida, and together with my colleague Lucas Romson from Rätt Olika, I've been managing this project. We recommend you to watch the presentation about Trans Labour Market Wallet before seeing this film. This video is about how trans people fit into a gender-segregated labour market. The Nordic labour market is severely gender-segregated in a binary gender analysis. Our question is, where do trans people fit into this structure? Do trans people work at all, and if not, why? And the labour market is segregated by gender, both horizontally, so women and men work in different sectors and different professions, and vertically, where men tend to make it to the top to a higher degree than women. Where do trans people fit into all this? First of all, let's take a look at if trans people work at all, their main occupation. What we see is that about 50%, about half, of our respondents were working, 45% as employed and 4% having their own business. About 1/5 were students and 5% pensioners. Those groups are not at all on the labour market. 14% were unemployed and 7% were on long-term sick leave. About 14% of our respondents were unemployed. This is compared to about 9% in Sweden and 8% in Finland in June 24. There's no major age differences, thus the high levels are not due to age. Out of the 14% unemployed, 3/4 have been unemployed for more than half a year, the complete staple with 2 blue colors, and 55% has been unemployed for more than a year, that is the light blue staple part. And we can see that AMABs more often have been unemployed for more than a year than AFABs. One of the major factors influencing people's main occupation is their capacity to work. Of those working, almost all have full or partial working capacity, purple or blue staples in the block to the far left. Of those on sick leave, the second block from the right, all have reduced or no working capacity at all, yellow or blue staple parts. And among the unemployed, the middle staple block and those outside the labour market, the staple block to the right, only a small share are able to work full-time. If we focus on the unemployed, only 15% say they are able to work full-time. Nearly half say they have no capacity to work at all. Those groups should not at all be unemployed, but receive help suitable to the situation. And there's a complete video about capacity to work among trans people, so we recommend you to watch this if you want more information. Now we'll be moving on to horizontal and vertical segregation of the labour market. If we start by looking at the horizontal segregation, we know men and women in general work in very different professions and sectors, dividing the labour market in a male-dominated and a female-dominated field, with a small share of gender-balanced fields. In our survey, we can see that about half our respondents in both countries work in a gender-balanced field, yellow part, and very, very few, only about 10%, work in a male-dominated field, that's the blue part. This is really interesting from a gender perspective. What gender dimensions affect this? If we start by looking at gender identity, very few of those with another identity than woman and man, the top staple, work in a male-dominated field. And men, the middle staple, tend to work more in female-dominated fields. But the effect is bigger if we look at assigned gender at birth. AMABs tend to work more in male-dominated or gender-balanced fields, and AFABs tend to work more in female-dominated fields. And if we look at the gender clusters, we can see that trans men, the top staple, are those most often working in a female-dominated field, whereas non-binary AFABs, very rarely work in male-dominated fields. And trans women and non-binary AMABs, the bottom staple, tend to work in male-dominated and gender-balanced fields. Thus, what we conclude is that the strongest influence of working fields is given by assigned gender at birth, but this is complemented and enhanced when other dimensions are taken into account, as in the clusters. Now let's move on to look at the vertical segregation. That is, who makes a career, and we once again can see an influence by gender assigned at birth. In total, very few are in a managing position, the dark blue part, but that's a lot more AMABs than AFABs. And AMABs are also more often in expert or key strategical functions. That's the yellow part, whereas AFABs more often are just ordinary co-workers. This correlates with other gender dimensions, but assigned gender at birth is stronger. Of course, there's a correlation between age and career. Almost all managers, the dark blue, are more than 45 years old. Few of those under 25 have moved on from being an ordinary co-worker. But the dominance of AMABs in career position is only partly explained by age. AMABs, the yellow staples, are more often in career positions than AFABs in all age groups. The gender clusters tend to show the same. The two AFAB groups, the yellow non-binary AFABs and the purple trans men, are less often in career positions than the blue AMAB groups of trans women and non-binary AMABs. Thus, we can conclude that it's a combination of the gender dimension that affects trans people's position on the gender-segregated labour market, but assigned gender at birth tend to dominate. Might it be that socialization processes and social gender around and before the entrance of the labour market affect choices relevant for the rest of the life? And we also need to reflect on masculinity and how it affects trans people. One thing we should remember is that if assigned gender at birth has shown to be the most important gender dimension to determine trans people's structural position on the labour market, when it comes to harassment and discrimination, gender identity and perceived gender are more important. You can see more of this in the video about discrimination and harassment. So to conclude, trans people are often outside the labour market. Reduced capacity to work is a major reason for exclusion from the labour market. Assigned gender at birth seems to influence the formal position more than other gender dimensions. But gender identity or perceived gender at birth is more important when it comes to harassment. So that's it for this video. Thank you for listening.